All right, so the 3 sessions that we covered this morning are just the general high-level base sessions. Now we're actually going to start on the step-by-step renovation process, okay? So we're going to kick it off with step number 1, which is target an area. Now the objective of this session is for you to now basically identify and select 1 to 3 target suburbs for you to become a property expert on. You're all going out and establishing property businesses, and what you need to do is you basically need to have a patch of turf that you're going to call your own, and that is going to be your area of specialty. Now how you do that will depend on a couple of things. First of all, what we need to look at is your borrowing capacity, so what suburbs can you actually afford to buy, your personal circumstances. There's no point saying, okay, I live in Balmain and I'm going to renovate houses in Lightning Ridge, okay? So you need to basically do some checks there to make sure that it's going to have a fit with your personal circumstances and also that it has a fit with the personal goals. Now, what I want to do is before we get started into this session, what I want you to do is I want you to take this checklist out. It's at the back of section 1. If you're not going through your manuals, don't worry about it. It's not too critical. But this is basically the checklist that you're going to work through to get basically down to your 1 to 3 target suburbs that you are going to become an expert in. So I'll just give you a second to do that. Now these are all on your checklist, okay? So you can scribble all over them and print them out. So it's at the back of section 1. Okay. All right, there's 2,650 suburbs in Australia. How on earth do you get down to that magic 1 to 3 for you to focus your property efforts on? Any idea? No? No, not necessarily. All right, so what we'll do is we'll do this. First of all, when we're assessing suburbs in Australia and the property market, you've got to keep in mind that the property market is not one market in Australia. Absolutely annoys me beyond belief when I get journalists phone me every single day saying, Cherie, what's your opinion of the property market? My instant reaction is, well, what property market are you talking about? So there's all this doom and gloom in the media, and I want to talk to you about this because it's very easy to get discouraged in property and for fear to get the better of you. And unfortunately, the media points a lot of fear in our direction. So when you hear this doom and gloom, and there's more of it to come when the people saying the property market is about to bust, is about to drop another 20%, it's absolutely ridiculous statement because you can have some suburbs in Australia that are booming while others are declining. You can have mini booms within one particular suburb. You can have some houses, for example, in Balmain. I'll keep referencing my own suburb just to give you a practical, hypothetical example so you can understand. In Balmain, for example, I know that the 2-bedroom semis are basically, they're suffering a little bit, but I know there's huge demand for the 4 to 5 bedroom family homes. So it's quite possible to have some property types growing in value and other property types depreciating in value all within the one suburb. So how can these experts get on there on the radio and TV and whatever it may be and say the property market's about to boom? It's absolutely ridiculous. So first of all, you need to keep that in mind, okay? All right. Your goal is to set up a new business that basically specialises in one target area. When you specialise in one target area, you've got a much better chance of being successful. Unfortunately, what happens is people in a lot of businesses, they lack focus, okay? So what they do is they try and do too many things. They become a jack of all trades and not a master of one. So what we're going to do is we're basically going to zoom you right in now. From the 2,650 suburbs, we're going to zoom you into a very small pocket of suburbs that you can basically just monitor and become a suburb expert in those 1 to 3 target suburbs. Do you think if you focus on something, you've got a much better chance of being successful? Absolutely. It doesn't matter if it's renovating or property, whatever it may be. If you specialise in one thing, a much greater chance of success. Okay, so first of all, in part of step number 1, where you start with this process is that you have to determine your level of affordability. There's no point looking in Point Piper if you've got $300,000 to spend. So you need to identify suburbs that are within your property level. So what you need to do, first of all, I think this is step number 1 from your step-by-step guide. So in fact, even if you turn to your step-by-step guide, let's work through this as we go through these steps so you clearly understand it. What you need to do is, first of all, you need to meet with a finance expert. Now, Paul, my finance expert, will be in tomorrow. You certainly all have the opportunity to catch up with him, or you can use your own finance expert, okay? But you need to have a meeting with that finance person to determine what money you can actually borrow. Now, if the finance person says, look, you can afford to be buying houses around the $600,000, then you know that's the sort of value property that you need to be basically looking for. Now, there's two trains of thought on getting finance, and we're certainly going to talk about finance for hours at length tomorrow. But basically, two trains of thought. You can take the conservative view, which is, first of all, find out how much money you can borrow. Okay? Once you know how much money you can borrow, you then go out and find a deal based on what your affordability. That's what I can call the conservative view. The other view is the creative view, where you don't, where you basically go out and find the deal first, and then you work out a way to fund it. All right. Now, for me, in my early years, I certainly did the conservative view. And at the end of my very first year, I started, as I became a lot more experienced, I started flicking across to the creative view, where I basically worked out, I found the deals, worked out ways to fund it. This one's a classic example. This was a property that I bought 3 Alexander Street. I did this at the end of my very first year. It was a $2.5 million house in Balmain. I went through, this property basically went to auction. It was a heritage listed house, so everybody ran a mile because of the heritage listing classification. I immediately went through, when I was doing this, the open for inspections, and I saw that this house had the opportunity to be subdivided. You know that house that I mentioned to you this morning, I encouraged you all to go and see, the Yule Street? That is almost identical to this property, where it's got vacant land to the side, where you can subdivide and put a new house here. So basically, this was a $2.5 million house. Now, I had 2 other projects on the go at this particular time when I saw this property, so I had no available cash to actually fund this project because my money was tied up on my other projects in the go. So what I did is I thought, okay, this is, for me, it was blatantly obvious this was a good deal. And what I did is I actually went and found a debt partner. So I went to this guy I know, I said, look, I found this property deal. I don't have any money to fund it myself because my cash is tied up in my other projects. So what I'd like to propose is that we do a joint venture together, where both yourself and myself will go on a mortgage, so we have shared liability in case something was to go wrong. I need you to fund the deal, fund the project, because I don't have any cash to do it. And in return for you funding, I will basically do all the work myself. So what he was contributing was the debt, basically the money, and I was contributing my time, my skill, my intellectual property knowledge. So we basically did the deal that way, and that's how I bought a $2.5 million house at the end of my first year, by basically thinking outside the square, by taking that creative view. So this will become easier for you to basically do as you become a little bit more experienced, but it's definitely one way that you can, basically get that started. All right, so in terms of, so once you know your affordability, okay, go to the finance person, know what you can afford to buy. Some of you know what you can afford to do right now. Then what you need to do is you need to start looking at the region. So how we're going to basically get down to these 1 to 3 suburbs is we have to look at it from a macro point of view, the region level, and then what we're going to do is we're going to zoom down to, once you've determined your region, we're then going to identify all the suburbs within that region, and what we're going to do is we're going to start to eliminate which suburbs we know aren't good for renovation and which are, okay? So that's what I call a suburb profile. So when it comes to researching a region, look, there's so much information on the internet these days about particular areas of suburbs and pockets and regional areas. So what I would suggest you do, for example, if you're looking at, say, I'll just pluck a figure out of the air, if you're looking at, say, Goulburn, what you do is you type in fact, I might even do it now. You just go into the internet and just type, now go into Google, type, Goulburn. Goulburn planning reports. So the government published so many things. See, look, Goulburn planning and building demographic reports. Quite often you find all sorts of things. So I would encourage you that when you know what sort of region you want to focus on, basically go in and use the internet to research a lot of the details in that respect. Now, you might know, without even having to do that, you might know which region you want to focus on. There is no mathematical equation on how you select your region, but most of you will know that there's a north, south, east, west, okay? Now, you have to use common sense in this respect. If you've got a $300,000 budget, do you think you're going to be focusing on the eastern suburbs here in New South Wales? No, so that's off the list, okay? Would you be focusing on the north side? No. South side? Maybe way, way out in the outer metropolitan suburbs. Western suburbs? Absolutely. So can you see that once you know your affordability, you're automatically going to know which region you're going to. Now, obviously, every state of Australia is different. Typically, here in New South Wales, the eastern suburbs are the most expensive, followed second by the northern suburbs. The southern suburbs tend to be the third most expensive, and then the western suburbs tend to be the cheapest region within New South Wales. But that's not the case in every single state. In Adelaide, for example, I think it's the properties on the western side, which is basically all the water, the peninsula suburbs, they are the most expensive. So don't think that general rule applies in every single state. So you use a little bit of common sense in terms of working out where your affordability lies. If you want, you can also use domain.com. So I'll just show you through Domain. So if you go into domain.com.au, so great websites to use realestate.com. So I've got this in your manuals, realestate.com, domain.com.au. So if you go into there and see where it's got here, like New South Wales, for example, you click on New South Wales. And it actually breaks all the regions up for you. See here, so it's got Sydney region, Hunter Central and North Coast regions through here, Illawarra and South Coast. So you can actually sort of start to pinpoint some suburbs through there as well. The other good old-fashioned way is that you can actually go to your local map shop. So, you know, they've got like the map shops in every single state of Australia. The one, you know, in Sydney, Mr. Map in George Street, Sydney. And what you can basically do is get these maps, and you can even start to look at regions just even from these sorts of maps here. So very easy to tell what region is within your affordability. And look, it may be a case that you actually have more than one region. The reality is if you've got, say, 500,000 here in Sydney, you would have possibly the south coast, southern side that you could focus on. You could have the western suburbs. You can also have all the regional areas as well. So just keep in mind. But if you jump onto domain.com, you can actually do a search by price, and it'll tell you what regions are within your affordability level. Okay. All right, so you've got the region affordability there. Okay, so the websites are domain.com, real estate, and real estate view. So you can actually conduct your search by purchase price, okay? Now, I'm going to just show you. Sorry. So once you've actually selected a region where you want to concentrate on, let's say the Northern Beaches, okay? We'll just do a practical example. You say, okay, I want to focus on the Northern Beaches, or, you know, this whole Sydney. We'll choose a smaller one. We'll do regional New South Wales. So click all those ones in those boxes. So once you identify your region, what you can do is you can do a search. Now what it does there, it's actually brought up, see on this side how it's brought up all the suburbs within the region? Okay, so what you need to do is you need to use your checklist, and you now need to, once you've determined your region, you need to list every single suburb that is within that region, okay? So you're basically just getting a very broad list, and then what we're going to do is we're going to cull that list for suburbs that don't meet the criteria. Now, if you want, in domain.com, you can actually type in a price. See up here where it says from. So let's say you go to the finance expert, and the finance expert says, Cherie, you can only borrow 500,000. We'd come here, we'd say, okay, I'm looking for properties from $1 to 500,000. And I know that I only want to renovate houses, okay? So you select property type as house down there, and basically search. And what it'll do is it'll actually bring up all the suburbs that potentially are within your affordability level. So we know here that we've typed the regional area here, so Cootamundra, Murrum, these are hard names, Wagga Wagga, Tolland, Cootangol, or whatever it is. And so what you're doing, those suburbs are within your affordability level. So go through, make a list of all the suburbs within that region. That list might be like 500 suburbs, okay? But better to list them all. And what you're going to do is you're going to start to strike out which ones don't meet your affordability. So as I said, you can do it via the internet, via domain.com in terms of getting that. You can do it via the maps. Or a great way to do it is if you know your regions, you can actually just do it the good old-fashioned way, and you can just get a street directory. So you can actually go into the individual maps and you can actually pull out all the names of the particular suburbs in your region that you're going to focus on, okay? There's also a really great tool, guys. You might want to use this. It's called the UBD Australian City Streets, and there's also got one for the country areas. I think it's regional streets or something like that, something very similar. These are about $100, and what it basically does, it's just a disc, and it gives you all the streets, and it just makes it a lot, I find this very easy to navigate. And they also have major buildings, so if you've got like an A&P centre or something, or a petrol station, all of this sort of disc actually pulls it up for you. So I use this a lot of the time if I'm pulling together finance proposals or whatever. It's very easy for me just to whack the disc in, pull it up, you type in the address, it brings it up, you can zoom in, zoom out, all sorts of things. So that's quite good as well. All right. All right, now also a great way to research the region as well is to basically do a search via Google Earth. Who uses Google Earth? Okay, great. Who's never used Google Earth? Okay, so there's a few of you, so I'll quickly just go into that. So what Google Earth is great for is just seeing how dense an area is. The reality is that renovations don't work in suburbs where there's availability of land. So when you are selecting a region, and particularly suburbs, you want to make sure you're not going into suburbs that have just obvious parcels of land where you can build in. So let's type in address. Let's just say, let's go to Golgong. That's where my dad lives, actually. Or he built the house with no development approval. All right, so what it does, it just lets you go in, zoom in, and it's bringing, hey, Dad. So it lets you go in and basically zoom in. Now, these are sort of good, really good tools for you to use as a professional investor, because what it means is you just don't have to get in the car and actually drive places. So it just allows you to, if an agent brings you a deal and you're doing, you live in Sydney and you're renovating houses in the country where you're commuting backwards and forwards, it just can save some time and you basically, not having to go and drive the streets, so to speak. And it also gives you locations. So you can actually determine from here how densely populated an area is as well, because you just don't want to go into suburbs where there's a lot of available land. Or you can also, the beauty with these sorts of tools is that you can also go in and see where negative factors, like industrial pockets and stuff, where your properties are located. So an agent rings you and says, Cherie, look, there's a deal that's come up in Rosa Street. You can type it, you could basically type in fact, I'll type in one of the addresses, of my properties. Actually, I know where property. 48 Smith Street in Balmain. All right. So you zoom in. Oops, wrong way. So if Chris, the agent, is phoning me and saying, Cherie, look, there's a deal that's come up in Smith Street here, it just allows me to sort of fly around and see if there's anything. Now, I know that all this stuff here, this is all industrial factories. So for me, I'd be like, oh, okay, Chris, yeah, look, I'll go check it out, but there's a lot of industrial activity right near that site. So instead of saying, look, okay, yes, sounds good, I'm actually going to call you back. I'll go and have a look, I'll call you back. If you've got these tools at your disposal in your office, you can quickly just pull, even while the agent's on the phone, you can quickly just pull them up and go, yeah, look, looks good to me. At first glance, it looks good. I'm just quickly on Google Earth looking at it. It seems to me, Chris, that it's quite close to industrial activity, but what I'll do is I'll jump in the car and have a look. So you're already giving them the heads up as soon as they call you that there could be something potentially wrong with the property, and it saves the disappointment of calling them back saying, no, I don't want to buy it because it's too close to industrial activity. So it's just having the right tools at your disposal so you can make quick decisions. All right. I'll take a question there.
With regard the industrial area, wouldn't that be suitable because of employment?
No.
No?
We're renovating residential houses, and we're targeting, as renovators, you're always going to be renovating residential houses to appeal to owner-occupiers, i.e. families or single people. Nobody wants to live next to industrial activity. So, yeah, you've got to keep that in mind. Doesn't matter where the properties are, 90% chance are that it will be an owner-occupier, not investor. An investor crunches the numbers, owner-occupiers don't, and that's who you want to target. All right, in terms of the region, as I said, we're looking at this from a macro point of view. We're going to come right down. From a macro point of view, with the region, there are so many websites that you can research to pull planning reports, and these are great ones to research because what you do is you pull them, and these reports start building your things like your finance proposal, your valuer's due diligence reports I'm going to teach you how to do over the course of the next 3 days. So all of this stuff is great. Now, the beautiful thing is you only have to do this once, okay? Only have to do it once, and it's done. Step number 1 should only take you probably 2 days at the very most to do from start to finish. So this is not a long, exhaustive process, but you just need to basically go through this process to get down to that magic 1 to 3 suburbs. Okay, so once you've selected the region, what you need to do now is you need to basically try and identify 1 to 3 target suburbs within that region. So how do you do that? How do you narrow it down? Because reality is you might be focusing on a region that has 500 suburbs. How do you get down to that magic 1, 2 or 3 suburbs? What you need to do and how you do this is you look for a suburb that has a specific profile. So what you want to do is you want to target 1 to 3 target suburbs, and you have to make sure those 1 to 3 target suburbs are located geographically next to each other, okay? So if you have a map, if you look at a map, in fact, I've got my maps here. So if you pull up, is that upside down? No. If you pull up the map, what you want to be able to do is basically go, you know what? That's my target suburb there. And that is your focus. That's a suburb you focus on, and do not deviate away from that. So we're going to concentrate your efforts now. That is your new patch of turf. That's where you're going to operate your business from. When a deal comes up, the next suburb over, that's not in that turf, what are you going to say to the agent? When he rings you and says, Cherie, there's this great, when Chris the agent rings and says, Cherie, best unrenovated house has come up in Drummoyne, 1 suburb over, what am I going to say? No, I say, I can't, Chris. I know nothing about that suburb. I haven't done my due diligence on the suburb. I'm not an expert in that suburb. So you've got to be really strict with that, because the reality is unrenovated deals will come up every single day of the market, but you've got to be disciplined to stick to the deals that are just in your target suburb. All right. Why you need to choose 1 to 3 target suburbs that are geographically located close together is because the transition in demographics is very subtle. Would you agree that the people in, say, Balmain are very different to the people in Pymble? Do you think the people in Balmain are different to the people in Cronulla? Absolutely. Do you think the people in Balmain, Rozelle, Lilyfield, all suburbs geographically located close together, do you think the transition in demographics is very different? No, okay, so that's the reason why you need to choose 1 to 3 suburbs, ideally located close together. Also, in terms of managing your time and your effort, it's much easier to choose 3 suburbs that are basically pulled together rather than 3 individual suburbs, because you'll find it then becomes an issue with open for inspections and actually physically having the time to get around and travel between 3 separate suburbs. Okay. So what you need to do is you need to look for suburbs that have a specific profile that are absolutely great for renovation. So I'm going to take you through those after I answer this question.
It's not a question, it's more of a... You know how you got Google Earth? There's another one called Nearmap.
What is it?
Nearmap.
Like N-E-A-R? Okay, there you go. Beautiful. All right, so write that down, guys. I've never been on that, so I'll certainly have a look at that. Okay. So what I'm going to do with this section, because we've got a broad range of people who want to work in the inner city, the outer suburbs, all different affordability levels, how we're going to basically do this, we're going to first look at the inner city locations, all the type of suburbs within the inner city locations that are great for renovation. We're then going to focus on the metropolitan suburbs, and then we're going to focus on the regional areas, okay? So I'm going to teach you now basically the type of suburb profiles that you need to look for in the inner city locations. Now, first of all, can I do a quick survey? If I said to you, you can live right in the city, right in the guts of Sydney, in an apartment, who would love to live in that apartment? Hands up. Hands up high? Okay. That's why you don't ever buy unrenovated properties in the city, okay? The true reality is that people, they like the CBD, but they don't want to live in the CBD. So as renovators, what you need to do is you need to start at least 3 kilometres out from the CBD. My thoughts is that anything within 3 kilometres is too close to the CBD, okay? So how you identify suburbs, that basically the 3 kilometre ring, is that you get your map, okay? And with inner city locations, they're basically deemed, or they're defined as suburbs that are within the 3 to 10 kilometre ring out from the CBD. So how you're going to technically identify what those 1 to 3 suburbs, the inner city ring is you grab a compass, buy yourself a compass. Now normally on these maps, if you grab these maps, normally 1 centimetre equals 1 kilometre. So if you get your compass, set it at 1 centimetre, so one centimetre equals 1 kilometre, depending on the map. What you do is you basically locate roughly, like you all know where, irrespective of what state you come from, you all have a general knowledge of where the centre of a CB generally is. And what you do is, where are we here? Okay, so Sydney, so that's probably about the middle point of Sydney. And so what you do is you basically get the compass, you draw a ring that's basically set at 3 centimetres. 3 centimetres will equal 3 kilometres from the CBD. So you draw the first ring, and then you set the compass at 10 centimetres. You put it on exactly the same point again, and then you draw a ring again, and that will technically define what is known as an inner city fringe suburb, okay? So that's how you do that. All right. So we're in the inner city locations. Now, some of you are going to be able to afford the inner city locations. Some of you aren't going to be able to afford them. All right, so one profile of suburbs that work great for the inner city location for renovations, and this is the absolute cream profile, is the inner city, what's called the inner city lifestyle suburb. So what the inner city lifestyle suburbs are basically suburbs that have the cafes, lifestyle facilities, so cafes, restaurants, boutique shops, giftware shops, basically all those little gifty, arty-cruddy sort of shops. What else? We've got restaurants, bars. So do you know what I'm talking about? Okay, so they're quite evident. These suburbs quite often get termed cafe society. Have you ever heard that? Okay, so they are absolute renovation goldmine suburbs if you are going to be targeting the inner city locations, if your affordability level is there. Now, Balmain is a lifestyle suburb. With the lifestyle suburbs, everybody wants to live there, so there's massive demand, and quite often when there's massive demand, it keeps pushing the prices up. So they are absolutely great ones as to target for renovations. I'll just skip back a slide. In inner city locations, it's absolutely essential that you have a thing called price disparity. What price disparity is, it's basically the range of prices from low to high within a suburb. Just show you the pricing disparity. And as a renovator, it doesn't matter if you're in the inner city, the outer suburbs, wherever, you have to have pricing disparity, because this is where you're going to make your profit margin. Some suburbs you go into, all the pricing is relatively flat. So you can go into some suburbs, some of the outer metropolitan suburbs, where all the housing is like 300 to 400,000. Have you seen those suburbs? Okay, you can't make that work as a renovator. So that suburb automatically goes off your list, because you can't add the 42% back that you need if you're doing a cosmetic renovation. So I'm just going to show you what pricing disparity is. So in Balmain, 2-bedroom houses, and you'll know you're an expert in your properties when you can do this. At the end of step 3, you should be able to do what I'm about to do. In Balmain, 2-bedroom properties are 600 to 900,000. This is for houses, and I never do apartments, as I said. 3-bedroom houses are 900 to 1.4 million. 4-bedders are 1.4 to 2.5 mil. 5-bedroom houses, 2.5 mil to $4 million. And then obviously waterfront properties, which are in a league of their own, they sort of start at anywhere between 4 million to 10 mil these days. All right, so let's not take that into consideration, because that's out of the ordinary. But pretty much, where does the pricing disparity start in Balmain? Starts at 600 and it ends at $4 million. Now, is that a suburb that has good pricing disparity? Absolutely. Now, this is where you can go in, buy properties, basically do a structural renovation or cosmetic renovation, whatever it may be, and there is enough variance in the suburbs in order to justify that increase in value, okay? So you don't go into suburbs where it's all 600,000 to 700,000 or very minimal price range. So pricing disparity is absolutely critical. I know that when you speak to the graduate support managers at Renovating for Profit, these are one of the things that they'll be talking to you about. Okay, inner city lifestyle suburbs. Now, in these inner city lifestyle suburbs, what you'll find is that they have a high concentration of people in the 25 to 45 year age group. Now, this particular age group is a great age group to target for your renovation projects. The reason being is that people in the 25 to 45 year age range are unsettled in that they move around a lot. Once somebody hits 45, 40, 45, 50, around that age, they tend to be more settled and they don't move as regularly. So younger people buy and sell, they're on the go. They normally buy three or four houses in their lifetime. And it's, they're probably the third or the fourth purchase isn't until they're 40, 45, 50, around that age group. So you've got to go into suburbs with those younger demographics because you're relying on stock turning over. Some suburbs you go to where it's all like older people and they just hang on to the properties and you can't actually get the deals. You can't actually get the stock to renovate. So these inner city lifestyle suburbs tend to be quite great for that. Now, some inner city lifestyle suburbs are lifestyle suburbs, but they don't have the cafe strip. So you know what I mean when I say the cafe strip? Like you have a main drag, all the cafes, the restaurants, the boutique shops are on it, and then at some point that cafe strip runs out. Do you know what I'm saying? Okay. So you go into your next suburb where it's got no cafes and people have to physically get in their car to drive to the cafe society. Now those suburbs right next door are still great suburbs to target, but you've got to keep in mind the property values won't be as high as the suburb that has it right there and there. If people have to get in their car, it will be a slightly lower value than people not having to get in their car, okay? So people want to be amongst the action. Most people in these lifestyle suburbs, once they move in, they don't move out of the suburbs. So just getting the stock can be quite hard. This is why there's high pent-up demand because there's such good suburbs to live in that people rarely move out. So if you can afford the lifestyle suburbs, absolutely fantastic. They are the renovation goldmine suburbs, I feel. Now, there are a little bit of pros and cons in dealing in these inner city lifestyle suburbs. The pros is that absolute huge profit potential to be made because because the land is built out, people don't have any option to build a brand new house. So therefore, the only option is to renovate an existing house. So, and they will pay a profit margin. They will pay somebody to actually go through that headache. A lot of people feel that, a lot of people have misconstrued conceptions of the whole council approval process. A lot of people will pay a premium just to have the whole thing done for them. Who's actually in that boat? I mean, we're a little bit different, but if money wasn't an object for you, would you prefer that pay somebody a profit margin and for them to do everything for you?
Absolutely.
Yeah? So yeah, there's a lot of you that would do that, and there's certainly a lot of people out there who are willing to just want to move into a fully finished house that's been renovated, no issues with council. Okay, so huge profit potential to be made, high pricing disparity in lifestyle suburbs, so this is particularly evident. What are some other lifestyle suburbs here in Sydney? Yell it out. Leichhardt is a lifestyle suburb. Balmain? Annandale, yes, to a lesser extent. Yeah, Annandale is definitely a lifestyle, but not as strong as Balmain or Leichhardt with all the cafe society. Manly, yes, Manly is a lifestyle. Newtown, 100%. Bondi, Paddington. Okay, they're all over the place. So anywhere where there's cafe society, that is pretty much a lifestyle suburb. And it's very easy to spot a lifestyle suburb because people are out on the sidewalk, people watching, drinking their coffees, all that sort of stuff. So they're very, very easy to identify a lifestyle suburb. And they tend to be quite busy suburbs on the weekend as well. So a little bit quieter during the week, but on the weekends there's lots of people shopping. There's a lot of movement in these suburbs, so they're classic signs. Okay, now the issue is the cons of inner city lifestyle suburbs is that the properties are obviously a lot more expensive to buy, so the majority of you won't be able to afford lifestyle suburbs. There's also intense buyer competition because they're highly desirable suburbs. Everybody wants to live there. When an unrenovated property comes on the market, it's like prices go crazy. So you'll go to auction and your feasibility will say 700,000 to buy it, and the property ends up selling for 850,000. You're competing against owner-occupiers who are taking a long-term view. So if you are going to be operating in the inner-city lifestyle suburbs, then you need to be quite aggressive in terms of dealing with those agents, nurturing those agents so you get on their top 5 favourite list, so you can at least start to get a head start, because it's unrealistic to think these deals are going to fall in your lap, not in the inner city lifestyle suburbs. You'll also notice a change in the agents as well. When you're dealing with the inner city lifestyle suburbs, they will pretty much say, Cherie, take it or leave it. That's it, take it or leave it. Whereas if you go into some of the outer metropolitan suburbs, the agents will be more hungry to do business. They'll be chasing you, whereas in inner city lifestyle locations, you'll be chasing the agents for information and that sort of stuff, because they take the mentality, it's going to sell anyway. So just be conscious of that. So what you're going to do is you're going to find that it is harder to buy deals, unrenovated deals. They're certainly out there and they're everywhere, but you have to be quite aggressive in terms of your acquisition pursuits of actually seizing those properties before they come in the market. So in inner city locations, if you're prepared to letterbox drop, if you're prepared to door knock, all those sorts of things, which I've done a lot of over the years to find deals, if you can do that, then you'll be well poised to make a really good profit margin structurally. I feel that in the inner city locations, it is more structural renovation territory rather than cosmetic renovation territory. Okay, another type of profile is what's called a peninsula suburb. Peninsula suburb is basically any suburbs that are located close to water. In an ideal world, if money was no object, would we all like to live by the water? Yes. Absolutely, because there's something soothing about water, something that just puts you at ease. So lots of peninsula suburbs in every state of Australia. Again, here in New South Wales, here in Sydney, can you rattle off some peninsula suburbs? Hunters Hill, yep. We're basically in a peninsula suburb, the Northern Beaches, yeah, all those ones that run right along the water, Harbord, Mona Vale, all of those are peninsula suburbs. We are in a peninsula suburb right now. In fact, in true reality, we are standing in a peninsula suburb. Is this a lifestyle suburb? This isn't, Kirribilli. I wouldn't classify this as, because there's no cafes here. Not really many cafes here. So this is not really a lifestyle pub where people are people watching and stuff like this. So this is more a true, more peninsula suburb because we're located in very close proximity to water. So Hunters Hill, Gladesville, Drummoyne, Balmain, Pyrmont, basically all of these, anywhere where there's water. So again, how do you identify those suburbs? Well, you can use Google Earth to go and identify the peninsula suburbs, or like I said, you just get a map or the good old-fashioned street directory, and you can basically tell which suburbs at a glance are all the peninsula suburbs, okay? So literally all these, all these ones running through here. I need an assistant with my maps, don't I? So like all these suburbs along Hamilton, for all the Brisbane people, Hamilton, Newstead, Bulimba, Hawthorn, all these suburbs, they're all peninsula suburbs located close to water. So what you'll find is those peninsula suburbs have very high demand purely for the fact that they're close to water. All right. Inner city stepsister suburbs. Any idea what a stepsister suburb would be? You're a quiet bunch.
Yeah, well, you've got the outstanding, the good-looking sister, and then the sort of the lesser one next door.
Yes.
That hasn't been discovered or is lesser value.
Yeah, so this one is more, so you're right, you're 3/4 of the way there, so they still have high values. So obviously suburbs like the lifestyle suburbs are what I call premium blue chip suburbs, and then you always have the suburb right next door, which is like the stepsister to the more expensive suburb. What happens in those lifestyle suburbs and those premium blue chip suburbs, people want to be there, but because there's such high demand, it keeps pushing the prices up and up and up. Now eventually people just get priced out of the suburb, so they then go to the next best thing, which is a suburb right next door to the premium suburbs. That's technically called a stepsister suburb. So this happens, and you can get stepsister suburbs not in the inner city locations, but also in the outer areas as well. Can you think of an example of a stepsister suburb out west? No, probably one. Parramatta's stepsister to who? Don't know. Yep, sounded good. Bella Vista. Have you all heard of Bella Vista? Okay. Bella Vista is a really expensive suburb out west. So a stepsister to that would be Balcombe Hills, Castle Hill, which are Yep, absolute great suburb. So I don't think it's all about the inner city, because I'm smart enough to know that 95% of my graduates are not in the inner city locations buying the sorts of properties that I buy, okay? So I'm going to teach you all of these sorts of things to start thinking, getting you a bit more broader out into the more expensive, least expensive suburbs. Okay, so what they are is they're primarily suburbs, the next suburb next to a premium blue chip suburb, okay? And what happens with these suburbs is eventually they start to, because people get pushed out of the premium suburb, and then what happens is people go to the next suburb, the stepsister suburb, and then guess what happens? Prices go up. So it's actually a ripple effect. There's also what's called an inner city domino suburb. Okay, inner city domino suburb is basically suburbs that have the knock-on effect from the premium suburb. I'm going to give you an example in Balmain. So you've obviously got your blue chip lifestyle suburbs. So 10 years ago, Balmain was pretty expensive, and it's still very expensive today. Balmain, you've got Rozelle, you've got Lilyfield, you've also got Leichhardt over here. So 10 years ago, I started focusing my renovations on Balmain, and then Balmain became quite pricey. And what happened is everybody basically got priced out of Balmain, so they all went to Rozelle. Rozelle raised in value, that became expensive. So then people went to Lilyfield, then Lilyfield became more expensive, and then Lilyfield, and now Leichhardt has been going through a boom for the past 3 years. So what you should do is, and this is a particularly great strategy, if you can afford to land bank, which is basically buy an unrenovated property, not renovate and just sit on it for a little while, for 5 or 10 years, this is an absolute great strategy. Looking back, if I was really smart, knowing now what I didn't know 10 years ago, I would have been buying a heap of property in Leichhardt, would have been buying those semis for $300,000. Those semis are now $800,000 to $1 million. I could have just sat on them and became extremely wealthy just by land banking alone. So if you have got a little bit of money to play with, or you want to buy some passive property investments, look for those suburbs those domino suburbs where it's basically become, been the knock-on effect, and then you identify where in the chain, these suburbs. So the reality is, you've got Leichhardt, you've got what's the suburb next to Leichhardt? Towards Parramatta Way. See, I can't even tell you what the suburbs are next to my target suburbs, because I focus on those so. Annandale, Annandale sort of over here. So Annandale was very expensive. That became very expensive as well. So the suburbs next to, like Glebe's over here. But it's the suburbs behind, towards Market Town, Lewisham. Okay, Lewisham will be a domino. So I guarantee you Lewisham will be on the capital growth suburbs within the... So it's really easy to predict where the capital growth is going, what suburbs are going to be your hot suburbs. Be smarter than the magazines, know this sort of stuff. By looking at these sort of the knock-on effects of properties, you can actually sort of pinpoint that yourself. Okay. Inner city locations. Other great suburbs to target for renovations are suburbs called your heritage and conservation suburbs. And what these are areas that typically are protected with a conservation blanket. So in the inner city locations, a lot of the housing is protected by council. They don't want you coming in and knocking over the old character cottages and demolish them. So, sometimes these conservation and heritage suburbs are called character home suburbs as well, and they're very easy to identify. Your double-fronted workmen's cottages and the little semis, they're all character homes. So what happens is the local council, they put a conservation blanket. Now, conservation doesn't mean heritage restriction. What it just means is that it's like they throw a blanket over the whole suburb saying this suburb has tighter development controls over this whole area, okay? And so what it does, it makes it more difficult for people to actually come in and just renovate or develop. They do this particularly for developers. The last thing that council want is for you to come in and knock down the whole house. So what they do is they like to maintain the look and feel, the streetscape within streetscapes, so they have these controls. Now, these heritage and conservation groups are very easy to spot because they normally have a high concentration of objector groups. I don't know if many of you have actually driven past, the Victoria, the bridge that goes over the start of Victoria Road. There's one there as you sort of come off the Anzac Bridge, and you can go to Leichhardt or you can go to Victoria Road, the start of Victoria Road, and they've got that overhead bridge. Have you ever seen the signs hanging over that bridge? They always hang signs like the Friends of Callum Park. Have you ever heard of that? Those objections again, the Friends of Callum Park have the Friends of Ballast Point, Save Ballast Point. So you've got these massive objective groups that come into these heritage and conservation suburbs, and what they do is they start to try and stop any development from happening. So they are very easy. Also, the style of housing. You go into these suburbs and you can clearly see that the style of housing is older style. So these can be absolute great suburbs to target, because what you also do in these suburbs, you go in and you never destroy. Let's look at this house, for example, right? You would never come in and radically change this house from a renovation perspective. So where the opportunity for you lies as renovators is to buy in these conservation suburbs where you come in and just refresh the outside, i.e. paint. You might put some finials or character features on the outside, so you're not destroying the external streetscape, you're just refreshing it. And then what you do is you come in and you basically internally you do highly modern interiors. Does that make sense? Okay, so have any of you ever been to these like Balmain or these heritage and conservation suburbs where you knock on somebody's door or whatever and they open it and you get a shock? You think, oh, well, wasn't expecting that. Well, that's a classic, and that's a classic opportunity for you as renovators to go into those heritage and conservation suburbs. Now, can you think of any other heritage and conservations apart from Balmain? Haberfield is a beautiful suburb for renovation. I've actually considered it myself. So it's got beautiful big homes, big character homes on big blocks, so close to the city. It ticks all the boxes in terms of an ideal home that somebody would want to buy. Obviously a little bit pricey, $1 million for a house, unrenovated house in Haberfield. But, that's a classic example of a heritage and conservation. Hunters Hill, Balmain, Paddington, Woollahra, Mossman, they're everywhere. So heritage and conservation suburbs, beautiful ones. What happens in the key thing with heritage and conservation suburbs is there is no available land. Okay, these are established suburbs, no available land. So when there's no available land to build, what's the only option? Renovate. Okay, cool. All right, inner city gentrification suburbs. What's that? Anybody know what a gentrification suburb is? What is it? Old coming to new. Okay, good answer. So what gentrification suburbs are? They're suburbs that are undergoing transformation. So what happens is you get some suburbs that are fairly grungy. A classic example right now of a suburb undergoing major regentrification is which suburb here in Sydney? Redfern, okay? So Redfern, you couldn't pay somebody to live in that suburb, okay? It was tarnished, very bad reputation. Developers are moving in. They're now doing mixed-use developments where they're putting cafes on the bottom, apartments on the top. They're coming in, getting rid of all the old buildings. They're basically putting new developments up, and cafe society will become in that suburb. That will be so. It will change from a gentrification suburb, and over the course of a few years, it will become a lifestyle suburb. Balmain was a gentrification suburb approximately 20 to 30 years ago. Working class people in Balmain, it was, from what I'm told, it was just working class, horrible houses. And what happens is in gentrification suburbs, the developers move in, the renovators move in, and basically what they do is they start to change the streetscape. So they start to come in and renovate the houses. The houses suddenly start to look nicer. A higher concentration of owner-occupiers move in. So with gentrification suburbs, when they're very early in the process, it's a very high proportion of renters, and then the renovators, developers move in, and suddenly the demographic shift from renters to owner-occupiers. So you start to get more affluent people move in, and when you've got more affluent people living in a suburb, guess what goes up? The prices, okay? Now, you've got to be careful with gentrification suburbs that you don't come in too early. Suburbs actually have a life cycle. So I'll quickly just plot this out for you again. In fact, can I have one of the crew members up to be my whiteboard rubber apparatus? Okay. So, with gentrification suburbs, again, as I said, we're creating a product. Your renovations are nothing more than a product, and like a product, every product has a life cycle. So when you look at a typical, like anybody that's any marketers in the room, and I just know this from my marketing days, that when you have a product, it normally goes through like an introduction stage, and then you have a growth stage, and then you have like a maturity stage. So what you want to do is renovate, and typically, like in these suburbs, they plateau along, and that's basically over time. Property normally escalates in that direction. It can either go like that, but typically it'll just track along. Now, in the gentrification suburb, you don't want to buy too early in this process. Like for me, you want to be buying in the growth phase, at least somewhere here. If you're sort of buying up here, it's not too late, but ideally not before here. So if you buy too early, like gentrification suburbs are great, but you got to make sure you buy at the right time of the life cycle of that suburb, because if you get in too early, it's going to be extremely difficult for you to, it could be difficult for you to sell the property, because the reality is that if every house on the street looks like crap, if it looks like the Bronx, you can go in and do the best renovation in the world. Buyers will come through when you've got your open for inspection and they'll go, wow, I love what you've done inside the house, it looks beautiful. They walk out the front door and they're in the Bronx. And people will always take that into consideration. When suburbs are in the gentrification suburb, and they're very easy to spot, they've got graffiti everywhere. They just look horrible. You drive through them, you go, oh, I just wouldn't like to live here. That's probably the only time, I call that the self-test. That's probably the only time you would ever evolve emotions in your property deals. If you yourself drive through a suburb and you just go, you know what, I just don't like it, it just doesn't feel good, cross it or feel this, because if you have that feeling, the chances are that a buyer is going to have the same feeling as well. So where gentrification suburbs can be good is for land banking. So if you can come in and buy an unrenovated house early in the process, you sit on it for 5 years. Like, don't renovate it here, okay, because you're not going to really get the full potential. Sit here, rent it out, and start to do the renovation when it's on the move, okay? Because if you renovate it too early here and then you rent it out, then you may have to renovate it in 10 years' time anyway. So just keep that in mind. Okay. Okay, so they're the key things: lifestyle suburbs, peninsula suburbs, stepsister suburbs, domino suburbs, and gentrification suburbs. They are the classic profiles that you need to look for if you're going to be renovating in the inner city fringe suburbs, okay? All right, let's look at the metropolitan suburbs. Metropolitan suburbs are basically the suburbs that are defined as 10 to 75 k's out from the CBD. So again, you get your map. Now, obviously, your compass is not going to stretch out 75 centimetres, so what you can do is get a ruler, and you can basically put on the centre point of the CBD, and you can measure out 75 centimetres and do a third ring if you really want. I had to think about that for a minute. I was having a blonde moment. So 10 to 75k. Now, this is where I think the bulk of you are probably going to be doing your renovation. I absolutely love pushing students out of the inner city locations out into the metropolitan suburbs, because the deals are so much easier to find. Okay, so what you're looking for, again, regardless of whether you're doing inner city or outer metropolitan, you have to look for suburbs that have the pricing disparity. Absolutely, that is not negotiable, okay? If you can't get those suburbs, forget it, just move on to the next one. Okay. So you've also got metropolitan lifestyle suburbs out in the 10 to 75k. So again, the same thing. Don't think that lifestyle suburbs exist just in the inner city locations. There's plenty of suburbs in the outer metro suburbs that have the lifestyle facilities as well. Can you think of any examples here in New South Wales? Lane Cove. Yes, Lane Cove. Yeah. Cronulla. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, actually, yes, it is. Yep. What else? Putney. No, Putney's not a lifestyle suburb. There's no cafe society. There's like 2 cafes, I think, in Putney, isn't there? But yeah, no, Putney's definitely not a lifestyle suburb. Ostermere? So that's a regional area. There's 75 k's out from the CBD, so that's regional. So we'll do that next one. Examples here in Sydney of a lifestyle suburb. Kellyville. All that big new entertainment, like, the big Kellyville Rouse Hill shopping centre, all got open-air piazzas. Top Right is an example of a lifestyle. They've got, in the new Top Right shopping centre, they've got the new open-air forum with all the restaurants and cafes. You can go there and basically people do the people watching the cafe society in those locations. So they're around. So I guess in those outer metropolitan suburbs, what you're looking for is those big shopping centres or those new developments that are going on where they've got the cafes and the trendy restaurants and things like that. Okay, obviously good transport links as well, and established facilities like supermarkets and so forth. Okay, you've also got metropolitan conservation and heritage, so exactly the same thing as an inner city lifestyle suburb where you've got these character homes. Again, can you think of any examples? One springs to mind, very good in terms of a conservation and heritage area in the outer suburbs. Strathfield, absolutely. Pymble. Pymble is a great suburb for renovations because it's got these big character homes, and Pymble's 20 k's out from the CBD. Just thinking of some other examples. Probably, Brighton. Brighton has got sort of, I think, a lot of character sort of homes. So they're everywhere. You just got to be able to identify these things. Okay, metropolitan private school suburbs. Great suburbs to target for renovations are those suburbs that basically flank a private school. Places like Pymble Ladies College, Tara at Westmead and Northmead, the King's School at Northmead. So if you want to try and identify these private school suburbs, all you do is jump on Google and type Sydney private schools or South Australia private schools, whatever state you're in, and you can basically pull up a listing of all the private schools in your own respective state, and then you target those suburbs right, basically flanking. Now, you don't ever want to buy a property right next to a private school. You want to buy in walking distance, because the reality is a lot of not necessarily affluent people, but a lot of people want to send most people would aim to always send their children to private school if finances allow, and they don't want their children commuting long distances to get to and from school every day. So you'll find that properties that flank a private school nearby are great properties that typically have very high demand, particularly for the type of properties that you're going to be renovating as owner-occupier family homes. All right. Metropolitan transport corridor suburbs. So there are great suburbs that are absolutely beautiful that provide an ease of use of people being able to get to and from work. So these are the suburbs that flank a major artery or a major freeway. Examples here in Sydney are suburbs like Baulkham Hills, Castle Hill, Westmead, Northmead. Basically, and how you identify these suburbs is you get a map again, or you get Google Earth, and you identify, or maps like this, and you identify where the freeway lines are. So you're looking for the suburbs that are bordering the freeway lines, because people want to have ease of access to get to work, and they don't mind travelling a couple of k's to be not right on top of the freeway, but a few comfortable streets away so they can quickly get on a freeway by ramp and get straight into the city. So those suburbs like Baulkham Hills, Castle Hill, here in Sydney, you can get on those freeways and you're in the city in 20 minutes. You can be in Balmain. It can take you 20 minutes to get from Balmain to the CBD some days, and yet you can be 30 k's out from the CBD, and you get into the city in 20 minutes as well. So they're great ones for renovation. Okay, metropolitan development suburbs. So there are some suburbs that go out into the outer suburbs, what I call a development suburb, and what this is older estates next to new estates going up. All right, now most people overlook this, and they're really good ones for renovation, because what happens is when you've actually got a new estate, well, I'll explain to you how developers typically work quickly. Developers will buy a large patch of land, a government developer or a private developer, and what they typically do is they control the pricing of the developments. So what they do is they break the development up into stages. So if they come through and let's say they buy a big plot of land, and they take a long-term view that they're going to develop this plot of land over the course of 20 years, whatever it may be, what they do is they divide it up. So they'll say this is stage one, stage one, this might be stage two, this one will be stage three, this will be four, this one will be stage five. So they don't necessarily have to be in order, whatever they may be. Now, there's actually opportunity for you as renovators. For example, you might have older houses through here, and then over time they acquire more parcels of land, so a new estate has gone up over here. Now, so you've got a very stark contrast between the styles of housing between the two estates that are flanking each other. Have you ever seen this, where you've gone into new estates and then you drive out of that new estate and you drive through some other streets, and then suddenly the house radically changes to these older style houses? So they're great ones to target for renovators, because what happens is which estate do they all want to be in? They all want to be here, but what happens? Can't afford it. So quite often you go into these metropolitan development suburbs where, and in fact I think I've got a picture somewhere. I'll see if I can find, here we go. See this one here? This is actually my sister, where my sister lives, out at Claremont Meadows, where I just did the reno in January. Now, see all this parcel of land here? This was a big chunk of land through here, and Landcom have come in now and they've actually built all terrace-style housing. So they're like townhouse villa sort of things, where they've come in and they've sliced up the blocks of land. So all the blocks of land here are now somewhere between 300 to 450 square metres on average, and they're selling those properties for like 500,000 or 600,000 out in the near Penrith, right? So they're quite expensive. Now, these houses all along here, they're all basically like 700, 800, 900 square metre blocks of land, and they're all selling for like 350, 400,000 in a livable condition, just a tired house. So as renovators, you can actually come in and buy in these streets, so you've got to be fairly close, okay, because you don't want to be too far back. You don't want to be like way back over here in this estate. So if you can find these properties that are located in really close proximity to these new ones, buyers who get pushed out of those new developments, they obviously want to be there, but they don't have a choice in terms of affordability level, so they go to the next best thing. So in some respects, these are almost like stepsister or domino suburbs, where they will go to the next big thing. So Sally and John will come through, a young couple in their 30-year-olds, and they've only got 500,000, but all these houses are like 500, 600,000. And so they'll come here. If you've got an unrenovated house over here somewhere, or one of these streets flanking this new development, they'll come in and they'll say, look, we can either get this 450 square metre house here, brand new, or we can get a 900 square metre block, fully renovated house, double the size land for 480,000. So they start comparing value for money. We know what, I'm getting more bang for my buck over here than what I am over there. Okay, so they're really good ones, development suburbs. Okay, metropolitan suburbs with expensive housing. Don't think all rich people live in the inner city. Obviously, in the inner city locations, there are a lot more affluent, wealthier people, but not all wealthy people live in the inner city locations. There are a lot of business owners, particularly industrial business owners who have factories and stuff. The reality is they don't live in the inner city, and they don't want to be commuting from in those outer suburbs into the city every single day. So there are suburbs out in the outer metropolitan suburbs that do have expensive housing. Can you think of any of them here in Sydney? Terry Hills, yep. Bella Vista. Denham Court, whereabouts is that? Okay, I never get out that way, but yeah. Yep, okay, so I'm sure that would be. There's, where Eastern Creek, there's a lot of industrial factories around Eastern Creek, and so there's some really expensive suburbs flanking those industrial estates, because those business owners, when you're a business owner, you tend to work in your business, not on it. So they're always, and anybody who's a business owner will know that you just work extremely long hours as a business owner. So the last thing they want to do is be working long hours, jumping in the car and coming to Balmain every night, because that's where the more richer people live. So you'll find that in those outer metropolitan suburbs where there are industrial estates, quite often the surrounding states, not right next to the industrial development, but a little bit further out, you can get expensive suburbs, and they're great because they've got high pricing disparity that you need as a renovator. All right, so in the metropolitan suburbs, just to recap, you've got the transport corridor, you've got the heritage and conservation, you've got the lifestyle, you've got the expensive states, you've also got the development suburbs that are great for renovation. All right, regional town centres. Questions? Sorry, I've been a bit slack with my questions. Sorry, I'll just wait for that, because otherwise we can't hear on the DVD.
Thank you. I just wanted to know what your experience was when you mentioned earlier about renovating certain pockets of suburbs with Rozelle and the old Rozelle Hospital. I know it's no longer functioning, but I'm looking at like a psychiatric hospital.
Oh, you mean Callum Park?
Yeah, I'm looking at a similar thing around North Ryde and the Macquarie Hospital. Is that like a no-go zone from your experience?
Because they're going to redevelop the site, you mean?
No, just because it's in a proximity of a mental health facility.
That's what I call a buyer objection, and I will talk about this in step number 4. It's something to take into consideration if that hospital is still going to be operating. It's like anything: overhead power lines, electricity substations, all sorts of things. A mental hospital, because people, and a prison, like a suburb, like you go to Parklea. People know that prison's there, and for me, if I was living in Parklea, the first thing I'd be worried about is somebody going to escape and come and stab me in the middle of the night. So call me paranoid or whatever, but these are things that people think about. Would you agree with that? So that's a buyer objection. So you have to analyse how strong the buyer's objection is, and that will determine whether you buy the property. But we'll talk about that in step number 4. All right, regional town centres. Okay, you can make fantastic money renovating out in the country, okay? So don't think you have to be in the inner city locations. As I said, there's great money to be made in the outer metropolitan suburbs. In the outer metro suburbs, it is much easier to find the deals as well. It's literally like every house is unrenovated. If you go to suburbs like Baulkham Hills, Castle Hill, it's like spot the renovated house. It's the complete opposite. It's like literally like every house is unrenovated. If you go to suburbs like Baulkham Hills, Castle Hill, it's like spot the renovated house. It's the complete opposite. It's like every house is unrenovated there. So you'll find it much easier. If you're somebody who doesn't aggressively want to pursue the agents, then start with the outer metropolitan suburb renos and then transition yourself into the inner city when you've got more cash flow. Okay, so regional areas, again, you need Google Earth again. I'll pull up Golgong just simply because I know that suburb with my dad. Can you see where the town centre is on this map? All right, so where you want to be aiming for as a renovator, you can pretty much see you want to be renovating obviously right in the town centre, like this is obviously around the town centre here. So all these properties right in the town centre are going to be the best one for actual renovation. What you don't want to do is, if you get a phone call, if you are going to target the country areas, what you don't want to do is start going on the outskirts of the town centre, okay? Because when you go on the outskirts of the town centre, what problem are you dealing with? Land availability, okay? So when Chris, the real estate agent, rings you and says, Cherie, let's say this is Golgong, this is the town centre. When Chris, the real estate agent, rings you and says, Cherie, there's an unrenovated house that's just come on the market, 3-bedder, quick cosmetic, post-war home, needs to be renovated, just on the outskirts of the town centre, what are you going to say? No, because a renovation, an unrenovated house can never ever compete with a brand new property. So you never go to suburbs where there is availability of land. It is a recipe for you to lose money. So you have to come back into the town centre when you're doing renos in the country areas where there's no available land. Now, when you're in the country centre, quite often when you go into these regional hubs, so if you can, try and stick to regional hubs. We all know what the major hubs are. You know, there's Wagga, there's Orange, there's Dubbo, there's Goulburn. Like, you basically look for the major Mudgee. So you look for those big regional town centres. And quite often, normally you'll have a main drag, like the main town centre. You have all the streets sort of running through the main drag, and you have all the shops and Target and Big W and all that sort of stuff. Where the opportunity lies for you as renovators is actually to come in and renovate houses quite close to the main drag, but not on top of the main drag. So you want to make sure that you're aiming for houses at least 2 blocks back. You want to aim for a comfortable 5 to 10 minute walk away from the infrastructure, okay? The last thing you ever want to do is with the country areas, quite often they'll have all the shops around the main drag, and then you can drive one street back behind. But what everybody does, everybody looks to park in the behind streets. So those streets, 1 or 2 streets back, tend to be very, very busy, much lower property values because it becomes a buyer objection, noise, traffic congestion, all sorts of things. So you want to be basically buying property, an unrenovated property back that is at least a couple of metres back from the main drag, okay? Because people want to be able to basically have a comfortable walk, casual stroll to the actual infrastructure, but just not be on top of it. It's also that's the same case too with inner city locations. So I should have mentioned that to you. When you are dealing with inner city locations, what you want to do is you don't ever want to buy close to the main drag. So if you look at Balmain, for example, the main drag is Darling Street. You don't want to be buying the properties too close to Darling Street. So buy at least 1 to 2 blocks back so you don't have any noise, traffic control, traffic congestion, pest, rat. Most of you would have seen from my introductory seminar, I gave you that example. Do you all remember that? Okay, did anybody not see that? Okay, so it's somewhere in the slide there is that example, and I will cover that with you over the course of the next 3 days. All right. Now, in the country areas, you'll find that most houses in the country area are older style houses, farm, cottagey sort of houses, or there's a lot of post-war houses in the country areas as well. You've got to think about who's growing up in the suburbs as well. So a lot of kids get raised in the country areas. Quite often in those country areas, they don't move out of the country. They'll either go one way, they'll either move completely out and escape to the city, or they'll stay in pretty much the area that they grew up in. Now, do you think young people would like to live in a older style home? Have we got anybody really young in the audience, like anybody in their 20s, 25s? Any young'uns? All right, cool. Can I ask you a question? So let's assume you lived in the country area. Would you prefer to live in a modern house, or would you be okay to live in a like an older style sort of country property? Modern house, exactly right. So one of my sisters lives in Golgong, and she would prefer to have a modern house any day of the week. The problem is there's no modern houses there. So there's a real opportunity for you to come in as renovators and buy these really low entry point houses that are next to nothing, and basically come in and do quick cosmetic renos. So in the country area, it's not structural renovation territory, it's cosmetic renovation, okay? So inner city, I feel it's more structural renos. In the outer metropolitan suburbs, metro suburbs, I feel it's both cosmetic and structural. And then obviously as you go further out to the country areas, to regional areas like Newcastle, Wollongong, I feel they're more cosmetic renovation territory. Okay. Some of the things you need to look for in the country areas are this. You don't want to go into tiny country towns that have populations of 900 people. Okay, so not enough stock turning over, not enough buyers, and you're putting yourself at risk. So going to suburbs, those big sort of regional town centres, as I said, like Goulburn, Dubbo, whatever it may be in your own respective state, where there's enough stock turning over. Now, how do you tell if a suburb has enough stock turning over? Simple way to do it, count the number of real estate agencies. If there's only one real estate agency in the whole region there, that means there's very little stock turning over, and that would be a danger sign to me. However, if there's multiple agencies within that region, that's a good sign that there's enough stock turning over to keep those businesses in business, okay? So that's a quick check. Now, anywhere where there's a major retail chain is a very good sign. Places like Bunnings spend over $1 million doing demographic research into a regional area before they actually put a store. I think it costs $10 million to build a Bunnings store. Do you think Bunnings are going to just whack a store willy-nilly anywhere? So they do quite thorough demographic search studies to make sure there's going to be enough sustained growth in that area. So anywhere where you see the major chains like Bunnings, Coles, Woolies, Target, all those sorts of companies, that's a good sign that that economy, that region is strong enough to sustain those those investments in those area. Obviously, sometimes you get regional areas, they have the cafe, like Society as well, so places like Mudgee, I know, because I'm familiar with that with my dad, so some of those regional areas can have that lifestyle facilities as well. All right. This is one of my students, Jackie. Jackie actually did my very first Sydney workshop about 1.5 years ago. She actually had absolutely no money. She came with her mum. I think her mum came for moral support. I don't think her mum had any intention of renovating. But one of the strategies that I teach for getting a start with renovating when you've got no money is to hit your parents up for a loan or your family members. So she did that walking straight out from the workshop. So she borrowed $40,000 off her mum. So she's on really low affordability. She was only on $750 a week wage. And so what she did is she identified that she wanted to focus on Wagga Wagga in country New South Wales because it was within her affordability level. So she actually bought this unrenovated house here. So in the country areas, you're going to be dealing with these sorts of properties, just your classic fibro shacks, and a lot of them come up and they're government sales. So ex-defence housing, ex-housing commission, there's a lot of them in the country areas. So you've got to just be careful because if you can monitor this, you can really buy these properties at a really good price. So like for example, in Wagga Wagga, I know that LJ Hooker and Wagga Wagga, they always seem to get the listings for the defence houses. And what they do is they sell like 10, to me it's ridiculous, they sell, they'll take like 6 or 10 properties in one day to be auctioned straight after the other. So if you miss out on one, you could potentially get the other. And they tend to go for a slightly cheaper price as well. So they're fantastic ones. So Jackie, on her very first deal, she bought this unrenovated house, 3-bedroom house in Wagga Wagga. I actually drove there to see it for her, which obviously being one of my very early students, so six hours each way. But what she did, she got it. Now her total project costs were $28,000, which was everything: her reno, her resale, her legal fees, the whole kit and caboodle. $28,000. She borrowed $40,000 from her mum, and she got in and she sold that property for $205,000. So the profit margin that she made on that is $17,000. Now I know that some of you are probably thinking I wouldn't even bother for that amount, but she made. Yeah, she had nothing. So 6 weeks. Now, how she managed this, she lived in Sydney. I think she actually lived not too far from here, I believe, somewhere on the north side here. And how she did this is she actually, she spent 5 days in Wagga. So she drove to Wagga for 5 days. She stayed in a hostel, so she paid $12 a night accommodation. While she was there, she lined up all her tradies, she sourced her materials, and then she came back to Sydney, worked. So she worked with her parents, so she had a little bit of flexibility in that regard, but she still had commitments. So she did 5 days on, 5 days off. So she did 5 days in Wagga Wagga, came back, remotely project managed, then went back for 5 days. And she did that over the course, backwards and forwards on her very first deal for the first renovation, which took her 6 weeks, and she made that profit margin. She then went and bought another project after that, and she established a good team. She weeded out the good from the bad tradies on the very first one, and she found it a lot easier to manage. So she stopped commuting as much backwards and forwards in Wagga because she'd already lined up those, used some of the good tradies, the good builder from the Wagga project on the very first one. So it can get easier. That's why I say sometimes on your very first project's going to be the hardest, and then it truly does get easier and easier. So you can't give up on the first one and go, oh, that was just too hard, because it truly does get easier. So you can see that if you've got really low affordability level, I would strongly encourage all of you to seriously consider the regional areas, the regional hubs of Australia, because they do present a lot of opportunity, and unfortunately there's not a lot of renovators there. So most people just don't even think to renovate in those particular regional areas. So really good for entry price, all those young people starting out.
Oh, hi. I was wondering, with the inner city lifestyle suburbs, if you're wanting to target a structural renovation from like a 2-bed to a 4-bed, does average block size come into it of that suburb? And what would you recommend that you would need minimum size?
So we're going to talk about that in step number 3 this afternoon, property due diligence. So you need to know, when you go into a suburb, you need to know what the average block size is. So in Balmain, it's 200 square metres. And then what you can do to that property then depends on your floor to space ratio, which we're going to discuss in step number 4. That's how to add value to the property. So I take you all through all of that.
Okay.
Yep.
But just in general, in a suburb, do you look at the average block size?
Absolutely.
Like I know,
critical.
not the specific one, but do you say, good suburbs tend to have an average block size of over 250 or over 300.
That's step number 2, your suburb due diligence. That's one of the things you need to research and know about in your suburbs, because there's no point in Balmain. I would never buy a property that's 70 square metres. Some blocks in Balmain are 70. In fact, I bought one of those. I bought a block that was 80 square metres, and luckily I sold it, but it took a little bit longer to sell. So you want to sort of try and buy property around the average block size. Doesn't matter if it's, give or take 10 or 20 square metres, but you don't want to be buying something that's radically smaller than what the average, because that's a buyer objection. Yep. Okay, so renovations do work in most areas. The key is identifying what suburbs, looking for those suburb profiles. So pretty much what you need to do is this. In your checklist, and as I said, this is where you start in the process, in that you're going to, so just to recap, because I want to make sure you understand this. As I said, it'll only take you 2 days. You only have to do this step once, and it's done. Okay, so you're going to choose what region you will be focusing on according to what money you can borrow, your affordability level. You're going to list all the suburbs within that region. You could have 100 suburbs, you could have 200, 300, whatever it may be. And then now you're going to go through and you're going to strike out which suburbs you don't want to be in. Like some suburbs you'll know aren't good, like just terrible suburbs that you just don't want to be in. Some of the suburbs around the western suburbs, places like Bidwell or Shelby, that you just wouldn't want to go in, very hard for you to sell a property there. You strike them out. You then go through and you strike out all those suburbs that don't fit those profiles. So any suburb that's not a heritage suburb, a lifestyle suburb, you strike them out, okay? And then what you'll be left with is the list of potentially suburbs where renovations should work in your target areas. And then you choose 3 that are going to basically be the closest to where you live, or the 3 that are going to be easiest for you to manage, okay? So it's just a process of culling down, okay? Just one thing you need to be aware of is that just a couple of basics before we move into these. In terms of determining your suburbs, don't ever go into a suburb that has a prison. It doesn't matter, it's just not going to go anywhere. Some suburbs are all housing commission. Can you think of one suburb in Sydney that's all housing commission? Ermington. I know this because my grandmother lives there. So Ermington, I think the property values have been $280,000 for the last 20 years. They just don't move. So that's a suburb that comes, strike it straight off your list, okay? So any of those bad suburbs, just go, cull. You don't want to be going into any suburbs too that have a high proportion of apartments as well. There are some suburbs, and unfortunately, particularly in Melbourne, I can't think of the names for some of the Melbourne people, but there are some suburbs now which are quite good, like lifestyle suburbs, but unfortunately developers are coming in and they're starting to buy blocks of land, they're land banking them together, they're knocking them down and up putting high-rise apartments. You don't want to be a suburb where you're just like single houses amongst the huge monstrosity, and what you'll find as renovators, you can't buy these blocks anyway, because a developer will always pay more for that block of land because they're working on 50 apartments going on it than you can as a single house, as a single renovation. So I would say avoid those suburbs where you can obviously see that a lot of apartments are going in. Classic example here, roads, okay? 10 years ago it was normal houses. Over the last 5-10 years they've all disappeared and it's now all high-rise developments. Somebody will always, as I said, prefer a new apartment rather than a renovated. They just can't compete. Becky?
Sorry, it was a while ago my question, but I just need you to clarify. You've said all along, don't buy near where there's lots of land, and yet one of the examples you gave was to buy on the side of a new development. So I don't really understand.
A new development that has been built out. So with the Claremont Meadows example, right? I mean, that's okay if it's going to be... Am I confused you? Okay, so you buy next to new development estates where the estate has already gone up. So there's no available land. The only time you would buy when it hasn't been built is if you're going to land bank and you're going to basically renovate in 10 years when the property is built. Okay. Yeah, but don't ever buy in suburbs where there's available land. Okay, now the reality is that you may undergo step number 2, the suburb due diligence, and you might find that after you've actually spent a couple of weeks starting to do your due diligence, the suburb is not all it's cracked up to be. Don't lose heart that you've actually lost a couple of weeks. For me, I look at that more an opportunity that you haven't lost any money, okay? So due diligence is absolutely paramount. Once you've identified your 1 to 3 target suburbs, only then can you move to step number 2 and then start to focus on how to become a suburb expert. All right, any questions?
I'm just asking about planes. How do you consider that within your property?
Yep. So that's part of step number 3, property due diligence. So yeah, there's some suburbs. Look, flight noise is often taken as a negative, but the reality is my current renovation site is right in the middle of a flight path, but it's still a booming suburb. So look, the reality is it will be for some people and not for others. So it's a buyer objection for some. You need to factor in how severe that buyer objection is.
I sat next to a man at the property who was absolutely horrified. He had not done due diligence for that property before the plane's going over the hospital.
Well, for me, Leichhardt's, he's assuming that. But the reality is that, that property I'm going to walk away with 700,000, so who's the idiot? The reality is that Leichhardt has been on the capital growth suburbs for the last 5 years as one of the hottest suburbs. It's one of the hottest suburbs in Australia right now. So people, because it's so close to the city, so sometimes you can have a buyer objection, but people are so desperate to get into that suburb that they will overlook that. Any other questions on step number 1? Does that make sense? The process? Okay, so that's definitely step number 1 is where you should start when you're walking out of this workshop. You need to start setting up your property business, and you need to start now zooming in and working out what suburbs you're going to focus on as a renovator.
Sorry, Sheree, this went back to when you were talking about the domino effect from Balmain.
Yep.
Was there a driver that showed you which way to go so you ended up in Leichhardt? Because
no,
was
it
there
was
any
pretty much.
marchery or?
Yeah, you can. I clearly saw this over the course of 10 years. I clearly saw the prices escalate. So it literally was in a straight line.
And you were talking
straight
about
line with a slight curve.
Yeah, we were talking about with the hindsight. If you knew what you knew now about Leichhardt, it would have gone that way. But is there anything that you could see or that you could use to predict which way that curve was going to spin? Apart from sort of major arteries and stuff like that?
Well, it normally tends to be the suburbs either side. So that tends to, obviously the ones that are closer to the city side are going to obviously go quicker, but the ones on the other side of that line will also move as well, but they might be a little bit slower. So yeah, you can quickly. So yeah, if you get a map and if you look at the line of Balmain, Rozelle, Lilyfield, Leichhardt, Annandale, you'll be able to pinpoint which suburbs are going to be great for land banking. So all those ones just on the opposite side of Parramatta Road, they're all going to be great ones. I couldn't even tell you what they are, but they're all on the opposite side of Parramatta. They'll be a matter of time. Perth? Yes. Yep. So just identify the hot suburbs, the ones that have boomed in price, and then look for the ones, and that's where you can do it from the street directory. You can quickly identify them. Yeah.
Sheree, yep. What about what's your view for the suburb with a lot of subdivision happening?
It depends on what's going on there. If they're subdividing and putting apartments on, or they're just going in and subdividing little houses, like it's like a semi-duplex. Yeah, that's fine. It's again, you have to work out whether that's okay in your own individual suburb. So I can't say it's okay because I don't know what suburb you're talking about, but it's is that acceptable in your suburb? So it gets back to your step number 2, suburb due diligence.